welcome to Ambedkar Age. In this episode, we talk to Dr. Khalid Anis Ansari from the Pasmanda Muslim movement. Welcome to Ambedkar Age, Khalid.
Thank you, Kuffir.
Yeah. So, what does Pasmanda mean?
Pasmanda is a Persian term,
Yes.
which means those who have been left behind.
Yeah.
So, if you look at the term, it has parallels to the term Dalit,
Yeah.
which is used for the ex-untouchables, formerly untouchables. So, Dalit means broken down, someone who has been stepped upon. So, it's a similar term, and Pasmanda actually encapsulates the Bahujan Muslims.
Yeah.
So, just like in the so-called Hindu community, so there are OBCs and there are Dalits and there are STs, and the Bahujan term is the broad signifier which captures these experiences. Similarly, Pasmanda captures the experiences of the OBC Muslim, the Shudra Muslims, the Ati Shudra Muslims, and also the Adivasi Muslims. So it's a broad signifier, it's an umbrella term which captures all these groups.
There is some confusion, which is sought to be created in some ways. Some would like to say that this is a new, terminology or a new kind of movement which is being invented by certain, sections. Mm-hmm. But there is a history of the Pasmanda Muslim right from the, time of conversion. They have not been fully, embraced or taken into the Muslim fold or the upper caste Muslim fold. So could you trace the history, going back, let's say, was it there from the beginning, from the time Islam entered India?
Mm-hmm. No, what I would say is, one, this entire understanding of history in terms of religion. So while it may highlight a few things, it also excludes a lot of experiences. So, for example, if we see India or even South Asia, then probably caste should be seen as a social system, as an axis of social stratification, which cuts across identities, right? So, in that sense, all religions or all the interpretative systems of religions, they have legitimized caste in one way or another. So whether it be the Hindu religious systems or whether it be the Islamic system, later even Sikhism, even Christianity, so they have legitimized caste hierarchies. And on an empirical level, almost every faith group, it is differentiated into a number of castes. So every faith group has these caste cleavages. So in my opinion, these caste groups must not be located within the broad overarching faith category.
Yes.
Rather, caste should be seen as an overarching category, and there are internal divisions on the basis of faith, on the basis of sexuality, on the basis of gender, and so on and so forth. Because caste is the master signifier, which actually allocates work, it allocates sexuality, it allocates distribution of labor, who gets what, who marries whom. So almost the broader Indian society, yes, it cannot be understood unless we enter through the caste category.
So the caste is the social system, and faith doesn't, it might temper the rigidity of it, but it still can't stop it totally. That is the understanding.
I would still object to that. This entire understanding that Hindu religion is very rigid, Hindu society is very rigid, and Muslim caste is less rigid. I would ask for more ethnographic work,
yes,
more empirical data before that is established.
Okay.
It is slightly dangerous, okay, to have a certain notion of classical or textual Islam and impose that on empirical reality. So, one, there is very few ethnographic work done on the lower caste Muslims. So unless we have more substantive narratives coming from there, we won't be in a position to really make a very generalized statement that Hindu society is more rigid and Muslim caste society is less rigid. Okay. Because we have to speak to the victims first.
Yes.
How do the victims perceive, because there are as many regional differences within the so-called Hindu society as there are within Muslim society. When we are talking about Hindu community or Muslim community, for example, if we talk about the Muslim community, then the anthropological People of India project, it says that there are about 705 occupational endogamous groups within Muslims. Now, if we are talking about 705 occupational groups, one needs to say further, which are the groups who face the most discrimination in terms of caste? What are their experiences? How do they articulate that? Whether there is even a sense, for example, let's take the question of Muslim mehtar, right? The halal khors, right? Would one say that their discrimination is less when compared to the Hindu mehtar, right?
But discrimination is not just from the Muslim lower caste doesn't face discrimination only from the Muslim upper caste. He also faces it from the other sections. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this is this intersectionality doesn't really work because everyone doesn't look down upon the lower caste.
Absolutely.
So in this connection, it's we could say that caste actually came in with the converts. Because the religion didn't really, doesn't really matter. So there is this work of very important work of Masood Falahi. Could you talk a little about it? Which traces in a way the history of caste practices among the Muslims in the last few centuries at least. Yeah. So could you talk about the book?
Before going to the book, there are a few things that I would like to flag.
Yeah.
One, whether you take Arabian society or any society 1500 years back, all of these societies had hierarchies.
Yes.
There was some primitive accumulation. All of these societies were internally stratified societies. Now, how that hierarchy was arranged, it might be different. For example, in the case of Arabia, the hierarchy may be arranged in terms of tribe, in terms of the tribal identity. In India, it could be arranged in terms of caste. So one, if you look at the early Islamic literature, so there is too much discussion on hierarchies, especially in the sense of genealogy, right? Even in India, during the so-called Muslim rule, there was an office established by the court. It's what's called the Niqabat, the office of Niqabat. Niqabat. The task of this office was to monitor the genealogies of Sayyids. And once that genealogy was passed, that these are authentic Sayyids, then they could apply for government positions, right? So there were major positions, they were actually reserved for the Sayyids. And the Niqabat was the office which was used to monitor the authentic caste claims, right? So, and if you look at the entire Islamic history, there is too much fixation on genealogies, right? From what is your, which race you come from, which tribe you come from. So, my intuitive speculation would be that when the early Muslims who arrived here, whether they were Arabs, they were Turks, they were Abyssinians, they were Mughals, whatever, they were not very surprised with what was here, because they were already introduced to hierarchies there, right? So it was a kind of an eclecticism where when they arrived in India, they found there is an already well-functioning system, right? And then they required a legitimating vocabulary. And I think they drew this legitimating vocabulary from the corpus of Islam itself. So this entire understanding that caste came from Hinduism, it is only a small part of the truth. There is much that has happened within the Islamic frame, which is probably occluded, it is invisibilized, and that is what Masood Alam Falahi has laid a finger on, right? There is much that requires to be done on that count, but it's a very good beginning. He has compiled a number of fatwas, opinions of legal jurists together, and he has shown that how they were Manuwadi, that is the term he used, Manuwadi ulema, right? So how these ulemas, they are practicing Manuwad within a faith tradition, which is supposed to be egalitarian.
Yes, if you say Manuwadi ulema, there is also this term Manu Mullah that I found in a Telugu poem, we had shared that. So he, Masood Falahi, his work is very important also because he traces it from almost the very beginning, of the Muslim advent in North India, especially from the Sultanate days of the Delhi Sultanate. So there is this history already. There is recognized groups and what are called, you might call it biradri, or you might call it something else, Jat. There are certain terms like Bajat, which are exclusively almost came over from Urdu in a way.
Sir Sayyid used the term Bazzat Julha for those artisans who rebelled against the company, who rebelled against the Raj.
Okay.
So he used the term Bazzat Julha when he was referring to the rebellion in Azbab-e-Baghawat-e-Hind, where he wrote about the causes for the revolt of 1857. That is exactly the term that he used, Bazzat Julha.
So this is important when we come back to the 19th century and so-called freedom struggle or the nationalist movement. So we come upon Sir Sayyid, and also on the other side we come upon all this Brahmin nationalists. So what we noticed is there was Phule, there was Ambedkar later, and then in the interim period there were lots of others across the country. There were also the Adi Dharm movement in Punjab, and also Adi Hindu movement and Adi Dravida, Adi Andhra. All these movements were there. All these were lower caste movements and self-respect movement. There has also been a movement among the lower caste Muslims, whether it was a Dalit or OBC, what are now OBC and Dalit. So could you talk about that recent history also, because you start with the Abdul Qayyum Ansari.
I'll go a bit backward.
Yes.
So I'll start with whatever was happening within the so-called Hindu society. Similar movements and trajectories were evident within the Muslim society as well. So within 1880s, 1870s onwards, after this first census and all, when they started, I think it was 1871 or 80, that was when the first census started. So most of the lower caste Muslims, at least those Muslims who were slightly numerically strong, and they had a certain section of educated, a certain educated class emerging within those lower Muslim caste. So they started inventing various mythologies of origin from 1880s onwards. They started appropriating upper caste surnames in order to gain some self-respect.
Yes.
Because most of their caste titles were used as derogatory terms, as objects of abuse. And the moment they had some social mobility, so they wanted to first Ashrafize themselves or Islamize themselves, so that at least they could have some modicum of self-respect within the Muslim body politic. So the Mansuris, the cotton carders, they traced their genealogy to Mansur al-Hallaj, right, the Sufi who said An al-Haq. So they started using the title Mansuri. The Julhas, the weavers, they again created another story, how they were related to Ayyub Ansari from Medina, Hazrat Ayyub Ansari from Medina. So, and they started using the term Ansari. Similarly, the butchers, the Qasais, they started using Qurayshis. Now, most of these were upper caste titles. Ansari was an upper caste title at that point of time. Qurayshi was an upper caste title. And when the lower caste started inventing their own mythologies of origin in order to gain self-respect, they started using their new surnames, appropriating the upper caste surnames. There was a meeting in Deoband. Okay. So Mufti Muhammad Shafi, he was one of the...
This was in the 1870s?
No, this is later. It's in the early part of, say, 1900 something. So a meeting was called by Mufti Muhammad Shafi and other Deoband upper caste Ashraf stalwarts. And the meeting was called to ban or to pass a law to say that this appropriation of upper caste surnames should be made illegal, right? So this is at that point of time. So these lower caste Muslims, they are now trying to Islamize themselves, and this Islamization attempt or Ashrafization attempt is not being taken kindly at all by the Ashrafiya class. Then let us take the term Qaum, for instance. Qaum, which now stands for the community. Till 1870s, if you read the Urdu literature, even if you read the speeches of Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan and so on and so forth, other stalwarts, this term Qaum actually denotes the higher elite Sharif classes, right? It is later on when democracy becomes inevitable and numbers become crucial in the political game.
Yeah.
When just just belonging to the property class and being educated doesn't matter anymore. And there is now some understanding that democracy is inevitable, there would be universal adult franchise, and every vote would matter. Then suddenly the definition of QAM is expanded to include the other lower castes. Otherwise, in the previous literature, QAM means Sayyid, Sheikh, Mughal Pathans, Rajputs, and so on and so forth.
Just as with the Brahmins.
Yes, sir, yeah. And the others are Julahas, they are Mansuris, they are Dunyas, they are Kasais, but they are not proper Muslims. They are neo-converts, or there is always a sense of lack.
Yes.
That the Muslim would be defined by the Ashrafiya class. Yeah. So that their culture, their language, that would be the norm. Rest, everything is, there is a sense of lack, right? So everyone has to compete. They have to keep on becoming like Ashrafiya Muslims. So they have to wear sherwanis, they have to speak chaste Urdu, they have to use a particular kind of poetry in order to become a respectable Muslim. So, those trends were going on. Around the 1920s or so, Abdul Qayyum Ansari, which I actually call the first wave of Pasmanda politics. So Abdul Qayyum Ansari, he was instrumental in consolidating the Moment Conference. I think it was formed around 1925 or something, Moment Conference. So there were caste associations which started forming from 1900 onwards. So there was Jamiatul Ansar, there was Jamiatul Quraysh, there was Jamiatul Mansoor. So these were different caste associations within the Mansuris, within the Idrisis, within the Ansaris. And it is very interesting because most of these caste organizations were formed in Calcutta, where Fakir works these days. So that is again interesting because most of these lower caste, they went to Calcutta to make it big in life, and so they wanted to move out of villages in Bihar and UP. They migrated to Calcutta, and that is where they got some politicization, and they formed these caste associations. These caste associations then they consolidated, they joined ranks, and they formed the Moment Conference. So the Moment Conference, which is the first wave of Pasmanda politics, it challenged the Ashrafi hegemony over Muslim politics. And something which is never really discussed is that on the lines of Dr. Ambedkar, that he asked for a separate electorate for the Dalits. The Moment Conference raised the argument, the demand for a separate electorate in around 1938-39. So they wanted a separate electorate.
Almost around the same time.
Almost in the 1930s, right? So that is the first wave. It was a Razil collective. It was seen as a Razil collective. The Moment Conference, it brought in the butchers, the Safis, the
Razil is the low-born.
Low-born. It was kind of a Razil collective. And again, the term Momin is important.
Yeah.
Because if you look at history, then the claim to be religious, it was always monopolized by the Ashrafiya class.
Yeah.
That, I mean, we have a certain genealogy. So we are the Pakka Muslims. And these are the other Muslims, in a way of speaking, lesser Muslims, they are the Muslims who are lacking in that sense. And that is why the term Momin is important.
Yeah.
So Momin means someone who is pious, someone who is very close. So they use the term Momin, so in order to stress that we are equally good Muslims, right? So they are still working within the Muslim body politic. So in the first wave, there is no strong criticism of Islam, or there is no historical excavation as such. But in terms of politics, there is the question of representation, which was raised. There is the question of separate electorate, which was raised. Abdul Qayyum Ansari, he was instrumental in forming Momin hostels when he became a minister from 1950s onward.
Let's stop you for a second here.
Yeah.
All this, let's get the geography also, right?
Yeah.
All this was happening in Bihar and UP.
And Bengal.
Yeah. Okay, please continue.
Yeah. So that is the first wave. They contested the two-nation theory. So the Moment Conference, it contested the two-nation theory. It critiqued Muslim League everywhere. But unfortunately, because there was a restricted franchise, the restricted electorate, not everyone was allowed to vote. So in the 1946 elections, which is also dubbed as the consensus on Pakistan, so only 12% Muslims were able to vote. So at that point of time, only the property classes or those who had a certain educational attainments, only they could vote. So the majority of Muslim vote was not even put to test. So in that sense, so if there is a consensus of Pakistan, then it is these 12% who actually supported Pakistan in that sense. And the Pasmanda vote, because there is a caste and class correlation, and it is so stark now. In 1940s, it must have been absolutely coeval. It must have been absolutely coeval. So upper caste would mean upper class, as simple as that. So 85%, 87% of the lower caste vote, the Pasmanda vote, was not even put to test.
And there was no migration as such. No significant migration from the lower caste.
At least from the caste group which I come from, there were active campaigns all across UP Bihar that we should not migrate. This is the land of our birth. This is where our ancestors are buried. So we will not move. So the Momin conference, again, it had the greatest influence on the Julahas, on the weavers. And we can speak on that even later, that eventually that was again a problem. Momin conference became slowly but steadily a Julaha organization, an organization which is dominated by the North Indian weavers. And that is why the other Muslim groups which joined the Momin conference in 1920s, 30s, they slowly got distanced from this organization because they started feeling that it has become a pressure group for the Julaha Ansari Muslims, right? So that is the first wave. It protested, it raised, flagged certain critique about the Shurfa politics. It was not very, there was no great excavation on Islamic history, so on and so forth. But at least it was interesting interruption to the elite Shurfa politics in India.
Let's look at the state, the colonial state at the point. They did give some space to the scheduled caste. They did give some space to the scheduled tribes. They were called to the round table conferences. They were also, called to various committees. How did the Indians, the British Indian state, respond to these aspirations?
I think it went largely unacknowledged. Whether by the colonial authorities, even in Dr. Ambedkar's writings, the first mention of Momin I find in the 1946 text. What is the text that I was reading?
Was writing about caste among Muslims and
it's that book. What Gandhi and Congress has done to the untouchables. There is a first mention of the word Momin, but Momin is treated there as a caste group without its political ramifications.
Okay.
So in that sense, but at least there is some acknowledgement of that. I don't know. Maybe at that point of time,
but he did point out the caste among Muslims.
Yes.
In
Absolutely.
Bengal,
Absolutely.
especially.
Absolutely.
But this remained. Largely as a political movement, it remained within the northern belt because probably the nationalist movement was also stronger there.
Absolutely.
So it didn't spread over the years to the rest of the country because Islam is actually supposed to. Largest number of Muslims were at a certain point of time in Indian history in the south and the west. Now the West has emptied itself in many ways.
In terms of symbolisms, there's just one thing. I think there was a huge protest organized by the Momin Conference in the 1930s in Delhi, and if I'm not wrong, I have read that there's some mention that around 1 lakh people gathered in the 1930s in that protest. So there was some mobilization on that count.
So we could also see this as a certain kind of lack of resources maybe affecting them more. Absolutely. Because there is a large section of population, almost as much as the Dalit population is right now. 14% or 13% could be lower caste Muslim. So is that what you think is the percentage
of Pasmanda Muslims? Pasmanda Muslims would be around 85%.
85%
of Muslim population.
The Muslim population in India is now 14%. Then it was higher, I think.
It must have been 22% or something.
Then it was higher. So the 18%, it could be larger than even the Dalit population in some parts.
Yeah.
In some parts it was very large, and this movement was not ignored by also the mainstream political parties. And anyway, the Muslim League ignored it. What was the response? What was
The Muslim League actively campaigned against the Moment Conference. So in the 1931 census, I think they went from villages to villages saying that you should only use the term Muslim. Don't mention your caste when the census person comes to you. So there was an active campaign against the Moment Conference. And Moment Conference went from house to house mentioning that please do use your caste titles or inform the census that we belong to this caste.
So Gurinder also talks of a contemporaneously similar momentum, so-called started by the Arya Samaj or the Hindu Mahasabha in Lahore and other places, where they went on so-called Hindu households and telling them to, Dalit households especially, telling them to register themselves as Hindu, not as untouchables or as Dalits. So this is a similar kind of movement. So that how did the independence of India affect the Pasmanda as such?
If you look at the pre-1947 stage, the Muslim politics, especially the ML politics, Muslim League politics, it was dominated by the Muslim landlords, by the aristocratic classes. And most of the lower Muslim castes, they were the rayats. So they were almost like serfs within these zamindar, with great restrictions on commensality, on mobility, from the narratives that I have recorded during my research work. In almost many Bihar villages and UP villages. So when I meet these old people who have some memories, almost there is a uniform pattern. Everyone said we were not allowed to wear clothes of our choice. When the zamindar or these people belonging to those families, they used to sit somewhere, then we had to bow while we move. In some, there are cases that they had to take the slippers in their hands and then move. So all kinds of discriminations are there.
They were similar to the
almost similar, right? Now this entire narrative of Muslim backwardness, this is very interesting, and I want to say something about it. So right from Hunter Commission onwards, from Hunter Commission in 1870s till Rajendra Sachar and Rangnath Mishra, there is this discourse of Muslim backwardness. So the entire Muslims are a subaltern community, they are a marginalized community, and so on and so forth. If you look at the data in 1880s in the United Provinces, then in terms of government services, the Muslims are around, in United Provinces, if I'm not wrong, the population of Muslims was around 22 to 23% in the at that point of time, pre-independence. And their representation in the government services around 1880s, 1870s is around 60%, right? So 22% population, the representation in government services is around 55 to 60%. Now out of these 22%, if we stick to the thesis that caste and class are almost coeval at that point of time, because capitalism has not entered, modernity has not entered in a big way, then this, out of these 22%, the Shurfa elite class would be around 3 or 4%. So 3-4% bagging almost 50-55% government jobs, and they are whipping this discourse of Muslim backwardness. Even in 1920s, 30s, this slipped from 60% to 30%. Now I see this as a great problem, because they are not approaching these numbers, the question of representation, through a democratic mindset. They are approaching it from the mindset of a ruling class. That Hindus and Muslims, they are two communities and we are partners, right? So in all, our share should be 50-50, right? So the democratic sensibility is not there, that if our population is 5%, our representation should be 5%. So and Dr. Ambedkar also in this book, Pakistan, he has references.
So you talk of the north, the state was similar in Hyderabad. In fact, much more, on the higher side. So maybe you'll study Hyderabad also someday. It needs to be studied. The history, a sudden backwardness creeping in. There were lots of backward Muslims, and then, as you said, the Pasmanda were uncovered, and they had no access to this kind of positions anyway. So here too, in Hyderabad and Telangana, Marathwada, Karnataka, all these places. So how would you say the Pasmanda has until now not gained much by way of getting the same assurances as the other most of the Hindu OBCs. At least 80% are covered by right now, but they are not properly enumerated in the censuses. At least the jatis are covered, and then 20% is much more. Has to be smaller jatis have to be spotted again, discovered.
Yeah.
The Muslim jatis, I suspect only 40-50% might have been uncovered until now. So this process has also been not been covered. Has not been completed, and this actually aggravates the situation of the artisanal Muslim, especially. They have moved away from agriculture, many of them, except in UP, Bihar, possibly.
Yeah.
So their situation, as Sachal too honestly points out, that Ajlaf is the most deprived among all Indian sections. So why has there not been a certain, any political, eruption? Let's say, there is every other class does demand. So what has been the history of the Pasmanda since 1947?
Yeah, I'll add on to this entire, when we were discussing this entire trajectory of this argument of Muslim backwardness.
Yes.
So this is working even when the Muslims are overrepresented, right? I think that trajectory continues from even 50s onwards.
Ashraf Muslim is overrepresented.
So Ashraf Muslims are overrepresented in power structures, and they rake in this Muslim victimhood card to their own advantage. Most of the excluded Muslims, whether they are the artisans or other occupational classes, the landless laborers and so on and so forth, those who are the victims of riots and all kinds of Islamophobic violence, most of them are Pasmanda Muslims. So the victims are actually Pasmanda Muslims, and the beneficiaries of the victimhood discourse, they are Ashrafia Muslims. So most of the institutions, the NGOs that work for these so-called victims, they are all dominated by those classes, right? So what I feel is that this notion of Muslim victimhood, because of the persistence of episodes of communal riots, and this entire notion of Muslim backwardness, it has created a kind of a siege mentality. Right? It has fixated the entire so-called Muslim discourse on a few key issues. And most of these issues are very emotional issues, and they are very instrumental in occluding, in invisibilizing the bread and butter concerns of the majority of Muslims who happen to be Pasmanda. Right? So what is the state of artisans? There is hardly any discussion. Are the artisans committing suicide because of what is happening due to globalization? There is no discussion on that. What is the state of landless laborers? For example, I would say that let us look at the main political trends in India. Whether it is the left discourse, whether it is the majoritarian discourse, whether it is the minority discourse, my test would be, how do you engage with the most excluded? For example, the university where I work, there is a one Gujar community. So we visited this one Gujar community some time back. So there are rows and rows, there's a hamlets of one Gujars, and the highest education that someone has received there is class 5th. Right? The one Gujars are included in the ST list in Kashmir, but they are not recognized in the ST list of UP. Who will fight these battles? How is the minority politics benefiting these one Gujars? How is the OBC Dalit politics benefiting these one Gujars? Right? Yes. How is the left politics benefiting these one Gujars? If in the last 60-70 years, the highest education that a one Gujar child has got is class 5th. So what kind of progressive politics is happening in this country? So I think we need to really critically evaluate all the major political trajectories, the first past the post system, and how to make our democracy more robust and more sensitive to those who are demographically very weak, who are economically most marginalized, whether this so-called progressive politics, whether it is Dalit politics, whether it is Bahujan politics, whether it is minority politics, whether these politics actually mean anything to these communities.
Yes.
And that is the test. My own intuitive hunch is that all these brands, all these, they have failed miserably in addressing the concerns of the most excluded. And now it's the time to rethink on all these political spectrum.
Yes, there is definitely a time to rethink. But there is also the question of larger, Muslim victimhood not being a totally, an invented narrative, but it is also a reality, and a Dalit victim, it is also a reality.
Yeah.
And there have been thousands and, lots of major riots which are almost, genocidal in nature. So as you said, as you are discussing the Pasmanda and how he is affected by all these larger politics, all kinds of larger politics, is there a certain kind of awareness among all the Pasmanda, at least in Bihar, UP, that they been used and they are being used and they are not getting any representation? Even though, you start with representation at least. You get a certain number of MLAs, you get a certain number of at least municipal corporation, corporator, panchayat representatives. Is this happening? Is it converting into any kind of real terms? Because they are not being guaranteed even the separate, reserved seats. So what do you think of that?
No, I would...
what is the situation rather?
Yeah. There are two things. One, continuing with this communalism thing. So one, there is a realization. Whether by default or by design, this entire communalism discourse, the manufacture of communal riots, the manufacture of Islamophobia, it has worked to the disadvantage of the broad Bahujan groups across religions. Whether it is Hindu Bahujans, whether it is Muslim Bahujans, mostly the Muslim Bahujans have been at the receiving end. But because of this secular communal discourse, their issues, their core issues, the issues of bread and butter, they are absolutely sidelined. So one, there is a realization, and that realization is now being circulated. I mean, more and more Pasmanda people, they are sharing this sentiment that we need a political brand, or we need a political articulation that helps us in transcending this secular communal binary, in transcending this majority-minority binary. And if we are not able to transcend this, then our core concerns will never be placed on the table. And Pasmanda movement is a very early tentative articulation from the Pasmanda Muslims to, it's an attempt to really transcend these boundaries so that at least our real issues, our core issues, they might be addressed. The issues of representation, the issue of land, who shares the, how is land allocated in India, who gets what, those are the key issues, issues of power, representation in media, the question of women, and these issues, unless this communalism and this Islamophobia, unless it is displaced as the master discourse, these issues will never get recognition in the public sphere. And on that count, Pasmanda movement has attempted a number of conceptual inversions in order to achieve that. So one is the entire idea of solidarity. So while the elite of all religions, they always focus on the question of religious solidarity, solidarity on the basis of faith. Pasmanda are saying that that is one kind of solidarity, but other kinds of solidarities are also possible. Solidarities of pain, solidarities of common experience of stigmatization, common experience of caste exclusion. And why not work with those solidarities?
And common exploitation.
Common exploitation.
Because that should have been the strategy of the left.
Absolutely.
But they have been the biggest proponent of the religious binary. Left. Yes, you were discussing the mainstream political responses. The left discourse, the Congressy discourse, and Dalit Bahujan discourses also. Who has been? I mean, what have been the responses? How actually we should gauge the degree of their sensitivity to the Pasmanda demands? I think. How has there been reaction? Summing up in a way, looking back.
If we look at these movements, I don't want to say much on the left movement, which has not gone beyond the minority politics, even on the social level. not only on the political level, even on the social level. There is some lip service, but in terms of substantive support to the movement, I don't see it forthcoming there. When we come to the Bahujan movement, I would differentiate it into the political trajectories and the social trajectories. While the political trajectory has all its problems which are associated with the Indian politics. So Bahujan politics, Bahujan political players also face those problems, and they emerge from the first past the post system, right? So they are in the elections to win.
Yes.
And when you are in the election to win, so you try to capture as many votes as possible. So every Bahujan party, it tries to speak to every constituency. And when it comes to the Muslims, they are aware that the so-called Muslim ideological structures, whether they be the mosque, whether they be the madrasa or the civil society, Muslim organizations, NGOs, media, even alternative media platforms, they are all dominated by the Sharif, Ashrafiya class. So they have this sense that it is the Sharif culture, it is the Sharif class which actually manages the Muslim body politic, including the Muslim lower caste. So they are satisfied at this point of time to just engage with the Sharif class and let them speak on behalf of all the Muslim community, get as many votes as possible from there. That is true for all the major political parties, including the Bahujan parties. On the level of social, there are a number of new organizations, even old organizations, who have been very sensitive towards the Pasmanda movement, including Manevar Kashiramji. In the initial days, all the Muslims, almost all the Muslims who joined DS4 or who joined the BAMSEF in the early 1980s, almost all of them were lower caste Muslims when the movement was not successful in terms of politics. Because they could relate to what Kashiramji was speaking about. They could relate what Behenji was speaking about. They were facing the same problems in their own communities. They were facing the caste-based stigma, the caste-based humiliation. But with time, there was a split in 1986 between the political and the social. So there was a political trajectory to the BAMSEF and there was the social trajectory. So there is one group which said it's a typical old social political binary. So Manevar Kashiram ji articulated that politics is the master key, right? And the social will follow. And the second group, which was probably led by Khobragade ji, or I don't recall his name, in 86 that split happened. So he articulated that social is equally important and we should right now focus on the social in contrast to the political. So that has been a consistent theme even during the nationalist struggle, even before pre-independence. The social and the political, this unique binary, it has been persistent in the Indian discourse. Now, if you look at the social side, especially various new formations, whether it is BAMSEF, whether those little magazines which are run by various Bahujan groups in UP and Bihar. There is a magazine known as Social Brainwash, which is published in UP, from Western UP. There are other magazines, little magazines, which are published in Bihar. They have really played a very good role in circulating the Pasmanda discourse. So they have published articles on the Pasmanda politics, Pasmanda movement, Pasmanda people, raised in very interesting questions. And even within BAMSEF now, at least there are two major formations. One is the one which is headed by Vaman Meshram ji, and the second one is headed by Shri Ram Maurya ji. So the BAMSEF group, which is headed by Shri Ram Maurya ji, it has a very interesting rotation policy. So the president is changed every 2 years. And when we compare the two BAMSEFs, then probably the one headed by Shri Ram Maurya ji, it has been especially sensitive to the Pasmanda articulation, to the Pasmanda discourse. And in the last 8 or 10 years, they have constantly given space to Pasmanda activists to come and speak from BAMSEF, have a dialogue. So on that count, on the social level even, I would acknowledge the work of Roundtable India on that count. Because when we started in 2008, 2009, you were one of the very few websites. When I used to send my articles, most of the articles were rejected. I won't name the major. I think you were one of the very first website who really published my articles, encouraged me to write further on that. So on the level of social, I see great hope, great sensitivity towards what the Pasmanda activists and ideologues they are raising. On the level of political, I think there are constraints. And those constraints they cannot be located in the figure of Behenji or in the figure of Ramvilas Paswan. I think those are larger structural constraints. And unless we really challenge the first past the post system in a substantive manner, unless we talk about a proportional electoral system, which would be probably more democratic and just under the present scheme of things.
Some kind of proportional.
Yeah, some kind of proportional. I mean, we can argue and contest the various models that are available. So whichever is more appropriate for the Indian conditions, we have to chalk out some kind of a proportional electoral system. Unless that is done, it is not only about the Pasmanda. It is about 60% of subaltern communities in India who have no hope of representation in this system in the next 1,000 years.
It is actually about the 95% of communities which will never ever get representation.
Absolutely.
150 communities out of 6,000 go to legislatures.
Yeah.
What about the other 5,850?
Absolutely.
And many Muslim communities are not even named as such, recognized by the state. So there is a huge problem unless there is certain kind of recognition that this, and it's also very deleterious to the resource crunched Bhujan parties, whether from Muslim or Hindu side. So it is always it's not possible for them to participate in this kind of competition which are called elections. That's my view. But going on what you said, we are talking of UP Bihar, and it's not even stretched to Bengal as in earlier days. The geography has shrunk, or the Pasmanda space. But we see, as I know, there has been some articulation of, angst by the Muslim writers in Telugu from the Pasmanda, local. There has been a kind of outpouring a lot, and we have tried to publish some of those in the Shade Mirror and Roundtable India. So why has this ideology not spread beyond Bihar and UP? Because politically,
I think even politically in UP and Bihar also it is very weak.
Very weak.
And if you look at historically, Dr. Ambedkar pinpointed very clearly that so long as this communalism is there, so every riot produces the Hindu and Muslim. So the riot is the chief mechanism which is used by the elite classes in India to actually create the Hindu and Muslim as identity. Those are produced constantly. And those identities cannot be interrupted unless there is a big subaltern movement of the lower caste. And it is this dilemma that has to be sorted out.
A big subaltern movement across religious.
Yes, absolutely.
Unless that happens, the Pasmanda is kind of doomed.
Yeah, that is what the Pasmanda is saying, because Pasmanda's slogan is one Dalit Pichda ek saman Hindu hai or Musliman. So all Dalit backwards are alike whether they be Hindu or Muslim. Ali Anwar also says it's a very interesting conceptual inversion that हम शूद्र हैं शूद्र, भारत के मूल निवासी हैं, बाद में हम मुसलमान हैं, right? So this is people interpret it as running down on faith or something, right? Here Ali Anwar is not talking about faith; he's talking about a particular identity. And that identity cannot be really conflated with faith, which is a much more larger category, right? And the critique against that identity is not because it derives from some understanding of faith, but because it is an identity which is hegemonized by the Muslim elite Ashrafia classes. And because that identity does not work for the majority of suppressed lower Muslim caste, so that identity has to be critiqued. And it is critiqued through the vantage point of sons of soil arguments, from the vantage point of Mul Nivasi identity. There are problems with that nomenclature itself, but that is a separate issue altogether.
Yeah.
But there is an attempt by the Pasmanda Muslims to somehow contest the politics around the Muslim identity. And just like subaltern anywhere, they latch on to whatever articulation is possible in a particular spatial and temporal context. So it's a counter-hegemonic exercise. It must not be really understood in terms of scientific precision.
Yes.
Because in any case, we are talking about politics. We are not talking about biology or science or those. So it's a particular kind of an articulation.
It will hone itself over
Yeah,
time.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So this counter-hegemonic solidarity of subaltern caste across religions, because those are the caste groups which actually act as foot soldiers in the right apparatuses which have been created across this land. So there are right apparatus, that is the term Paul Brass uses, but he hasn't gone further. Why are these right apparatuses there in the first place?
Yes.
What role do these right apparatuses serve in consolidating a big sovereign capitalist empire? So one has to understand these right apparatus as a form of restorative violence, which basically consolidates the position of sovereign across religions from the democratic assertion that is coming from the grassroots.
So, do you think this the stake of in creating and sustaining this religious binary Hindu Muslim, how much of the responsibility would you attribute to the Sangh?
I would attribute the responsibility to all the elite classes.
Yeah.
I won't really go into the question of measuring, which is what? I think it's a symbiotic relationship, right?
Yeah.
So it's a symbiotic relationship. Hindu nationalism and Muslim nationalism, they co-produce each other with the result that the voices of the vast majority are crippled. That would be my interest. I won't go into the question who is more responsible, who is less responsible.
Because this question is raised again and again.
No, it is a master discourse, between slave owners. My slave owner, my master is better than your master. I'm not interested in that.
Yes.
I am a slave. You are a slave. Now we have to talk about slavery.
Yes.
Which master treated you better than my master? That is not my concern.
So that is.
It's a master's discourse.
Yes, of course. So we can't choose between masters because we don't want masters.
Absolutely. We have to get rid of masters altogether.
Yes. So that how. I mean, in the situation wherein this polity is so dominated by two kind of political formations and others are just hangers on other national parties, and there are lots of regional parties which do, negotiate to them these identities on a more, concrete basis at the grassroots. In a way, the Sangh and the Congresi formations don't even have to deal with the Pasmanda Muslim because they have, in a way, they just have to deal with the Ashraf and also the Brahmin on other side. And the riot apparatuses, they are switched on or off whenever they need to. So, if this has to be carried forward, we have recognized that there has to be solidarities across Bahujan communities, across faith. There also has to be a certain kind of recognition that the regional parties may play much more practical role in diffusing, or addressing the Pasmanda questions. What do you think of that?
One, I would say that the ruling class in India, which is obviously the caste elite across religions, one, we should be very clear that its methodology in politics is very similar, right? So it will try to appropriate the new dissenting voices within their jurisdiction. It will create whispering campaigns. It will resort to character assassination. All kinds of, the methodology is very similar. I'll give a practical, an empirical example. For example, in 2005, Lalu was the chief minister. So he had ruled Bihar for a large number of years, say 10 to 15 years. And then Bihar was going into elections. Now, Nitish, who was an ally of BJP, so they approached Ali Anwar Sahib, right? And they formed this Mahadalit, Ati Pichda Pasmanda alliance, right? So initially Ali Anwar was hesitant, but when Nitish went to his house and there was a discussion and conversation, so this alliance was gelled and it came into existence. When they went into the elections, obviously Lalu was wiped out, and Nitish party, the JDU, it and BJP combined, they won handsomely. It happened because this MBC vote, Mahadalit vote, and Pasmanda vote, which were obviously feeling excluded. The Lalu's brand of politics. Lalu used to say our alliance is MY alliance, my Samikaranam, MY alliance. Ali Anwar critiqued, it is not MY alliance, it is FMY alliance, it is Forward Muslim Yadav alliance, right? So that is the kind of critique with Ali Anwar advanced. Now at that point of time, the Ashrafia organizations, they dubbed Ali Anwar as a BJP agent, 2005, right?
Yeah.
So they dubbed Ali Anwar as the BJP agent. When Nitish Kumar won the elections, he became a Rajya Sabha member. Nitish sent him to the higher house. He sent him to the Rajya Sabha. Now, Ali Anwar, who was an RSS agent, so-called, Nitish Kumar, who was a BJP ally, and Lalu Yadav was obviously the savior of all Muslims. Now they repositioned themselves. And later, one I won't name, but most of the big Ashrafia organizations in Bihar, they got very close to Nitish Kumar, and they convinced him that now the Muslim vote will come towards you. We'll ensure that. And the next elections also, Nitish won. And one of those people who critiqued Ali Anwar as being a Sangh agent, his daughter stood for elections from the JDU ticket, right? Yep. So within 5 years, this entire understanding that Ali Anwar is a BJP agent and Nitish is a BJP ally, all that went into the dustbin. The Ashrafia class in Bihar, it repositioned themselves. It went over to Nitish Kumar, and Nitish stopped using the term Pasmanda. Immediately after winning the 2005 elections, when he came out of the airport, so he said, I have won this battle because of the MBC, Pasmanda and Mahadalit vote, right? Nitish clearly acknowledged that, and Praful Bidwai also wrote an article in Frontline at that point of time, reflecting this. But in 5 years, what happened? The entire Ashrafia brigade, it got very close to Nitish Kumar. Now Nitish felt that I no longer need the Pasmanda community because the entire Muslim community is coming to me. Again, Ali Anwar is still the JDU MP, but Nitish is no longer talking about the Pasmandas. So their ability to reposition because of their control over the ideological propaganda machinery, over the so-called community institutions. So it gives them more leverage.
Whose ability are you talking about?
The Ashrafia.
Okay.
The elite Muslim ability.
Yeah.
So from Lalu, they shifted to Nitish Kumar.
They don't obviously derive their strength from numbers. So they derive their strength from traditional caste capital structures.
Yeah. Also colonization.
Yes.
I mean, their discourse has colonized the Pasmanda. Just like the Savarn Hindu discourse has colonized the vast majority of so-called Hindu caste.
Do you see this kind of recognition of the Pasmanda, even if temporarily, happening within the nationalist discourse?
I don't get it. Can you repeat the question?
Do you see this kind of recognition, even if temporarily, of the Pasmanda issue by the in the nationalist discourse of the let's say the national parties, like the Congress?
It is there because people are still confused how this will play out. Everyone acknowledges that this is a new constituency. This is a new subterranean movement that is emerging. But no one is actually sure how this will actually pan out. So there is a sense of ambiguity, there is a sense of anxiety. Because there is an experience of the Dalit politics. In 1980s, no one took Mayawati and Kashi Ram seriously. Right? But they changed the entire chessboard, entire chess game altogether. With 1994 BSP came to power in UP, and even then they kept on underestimating. They thought that they will manage, but in 2000 Mayawati came back with a majority. Right? So there is something which the Dalit politics has established. which is the fear of the unknown. Don't take these people lightly, right? So Mayawati ji has established something that the Dalit Bahujans can be politically ambitious. They can also play the game to their favor. They can also negotiate. They can also reposition themselves. So as far as the Pasmanda is concerned, almost, if you look at last 10 years, every major party has paid lip service. Even Modi ji has used the term Pasmanda in one of his speeches. I have that copy somewhere. Rahul Gandhi has had negotiations with the Pasmanda activists, right? So almost all parties, they are engaging with them, they are talking to them, but not in a sense to emancipate them, in a sense to gauge which way the movement is moving, what is the right time to really...
the first goal is, of course, representation.
Yeah.
Who has been given, whether it has been the regional parties or the national parties, they have given more representation to the Pasmanda. As I said, Nitish did try.
I think Nitish tried, but across board, I think the story is the same.
And you also mentioned Ghanshyam Sahib had also tried to an extent in UP.
Again, whatever happened with Nishit Kumar, that is what happened to Kashi Ramji. Once he became powerful, the entire UP Ashrafiya class, so right now, if you look at Behenji, if you look who is on the left side, who is on the right side, you'll find people from particular caste location, whether Hindu or Muslim.
That's the same, they say, there are, if the Dalits and Adivasis have 121 or so reserve seats, there are, around 125 seats wherein own MPs I'm talking about, 125 seats across India wherein only the upper caste are always chosen and elected. I mean, these are also, you should be considered, even if not named officially. So these are also reserved seats, reserved for the upper caste. And the competition for the rest is, of course, is not very tough for them either, because the rest remaining only the OBC, among which the Muslims also fall. And the OBCs are right now only among those 18%. So how do you think the Pasmanda will ever reach Indian Parliament?
I mean, there are no shortcut solutions. They'll have to work just like all subaltern communities have worked. They'll have to study, they'll have to research, they'll have to organize, they have to struggle. So those are there's no shortcut.
There is only Ali Anwar we can speak about right now.
There are also others, but the movement is still very nascent, and probably in the next 5 to 10 years, many more voices will emerge, many more institutions and organizations will emerge. So
I'm talking about the larger structures of how this electoral system is and polity is,
One thing, like you said about the reserved constituencies, that is what needs to be mentioned here. Most of the Dalit reserved constituencies, if you look at the data, then those constituencies are reserved where there is a majority of Pasmanda population.
Yes.
Right? Number one. And because of the 1950 presidential order, Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims, they have been excluded from the SC list.
That is the question I want to ask. Is there we keep hearing of certain agitations and protests demanding that, but the voice from the Dalit Christians is more than the voice from the Dalit Muslims in some ways. That's what I found from
I think it's because of the church.
It's quite
because they have an organized church, and Muslims don't have an organized body of that sort.
And they have been consistently asking, but the voice from the any caste voices from Muslim, those who are vocal publicly, there has been more of a rise in demand for religious reservation on the basis of there being a Muslims as a whole being a marginalized category. What do you think of that?
Oh, and those voices, Muslims, reservation for Muslims as a whole community, those are usually raised by those organizations that are in any case dominated by the Ashrafiya Muslims. But Pasmanda Muslims are already getting reservations in even the central OBC list, in the state OBC list. Now the question is not reservation.
How do you understand this? If the Pasmanda, who are the majority, are getting reservations, they're not. I mean, the majority is not getting reservations, but formally it has. it has been
They are
recognized.
recognized. They are recognized in the list.
So the caste also had to be notified and made aware of in many places. So what is this recognition of only the whole Muslim category as a backward?
That is a ploy by the Shafi'a caste to get included within the OBC reservations.
Is it to just as a further deter or stop the reservation?
Absolutely.
For
Absolutely.
the Pasmanda?
Absolutely.
Because that's what it has resulted in most times.
Absolutely.
Because whenever the issue was raised in AP, so it went back again to the Backward Class Commission, and then it went to courts, and it's still hanging around in courts in some ways. So and that's how it is being raised again in Tamil Nadu and other places, Maharashtra. So this is actually stopping the these settlements from reaching the most backward.
Yeah.
So this I see this as also an attempt to dilute the truth or reality that caste is the primary divide in Indian society, and to again bring back the religious divide, even if it doesn't yield any results practically to the Pasmanda or to the Ashram Muslim. It does serve the Brahman needs. So I would like to understand the need for the minorities, so-called religious minorities, the leadership, Ashraf leadership, to create a Hindu. Why is there a need to create the Hindu?
I think it's a cause and effect relationship.
Because
it's a symbiotic relationship where both win. Both get from the state larger benefits when compared to the population, right? So if you look at the
create the Hindu, the obvious non-Hindus are the Adivasis and the Dalits and the Lingayas and several such communities, and the Sikhs and the Buddhists, Jains. These are not Hindus. So, but broadly speaking, they are all categorized as Hindu. Apart from that, there are in the backward classes, among the backward classes, 90% of them are, actually speaking, the 100% of them don't have access to the scripture, access to any gurus or whatever, and acceptance of the Brahmin, either way, has been very recent. So this need to create the Hindu justifies the need, to promote the Muslim as a separate category.
Absolutely. If you look at, there are around more than 650 lower caste groups within Muslims. All of these 650 lower caste groups, they have their own mythology's origin, they have their own occupational specialization, they have their own culture, they are linguistically different, they are regionally spread out, right? Now, if these 650 communities, they mobilize, they organize, and if they bring their concerns to the public sphere, it will be impossible for the minority category to really accommodate them. Similarly for the majority category. If 4,000 caste groups,
the majority will break down.
The majority will break down. So the majority-minority duopoly, it is actually a very stubborn invention. And to consolidate their own position within a democratic game. And unless we do away with the majority-minority category, unless we radically redefine or transcend or understand whatever, I'm not very sure of the words to use here. I'm using the term post-minority condition for this, right? So I'm saying there is a need to revisit. There is a need to revisit how the secular communal duopoly, how the majority-minority category, how it has played at the hands of the Savarnas and actually excluded the mass majority.
Do you think this baggage, secular, communal, Muslim, Hindu comes well along with the the whole design of the Indian nation? It helps set this course. The secularism and communalism. There are good elements, bad elements. It's like in India we divide politics and people into good people, bad people. There is no stratification. There are only good people, bad people. So as a friend was saying. So this kind of politics doesn't promise emancipation even in the distant future. Because this discourse can go on and on. Any time the Pasmanda makes a demand, that the backward classes makes a demand that our reservations, the Dalits make a demand that our rights as humans be recognized. They'll bring in the Hindu-Muslim communal secular divide.
Yeah.
They'll bring in the other kinds of divides, or multifarious divides.
Yeah.
So, even until the distant future, it seems very bleak that the Pasmanda would ever enter the parliament.
It is very bleak, but there is also hope.
Which means, actually speaking, let's look at the reality of this, what I've just said, which actually means that 85% of Muslims will never be represented in the Indian parliament.
Also 85% of Hindus.
Yeah, of course.
So,
let this also be recognized, because that is already recognized. This also let it be emphasized. They will never ever,
absolutely,
under the present conditions and under the present structures.
Why I am saying there is hope? Because this early imagination of the nation and its related conceptual assemblage, whether it is the majority, minority, secular communalism, and so on and so forth, all of this conceptual assemblage, it is now under increasing pressure from all quarters. But the nation is being reimagined, majority and minority is being reimagined, secular and communalism is being reimagined, but it is being reimagined in the interest of and from the vantage point of the elite classes. Right? Now it is, the onus is on the Bahujan classes, how to really challenge this rethinking process and bring their own concerns into reconfiguring these categories so that they are more pro-subaltern, pro-Bahujan. So it's a discursive battle. So nation state is an empty signifier. There is clarity that Dr. Ambedkar was very clear that this is a nation, this is a collection of nationalities. It's not really a nation, it is a nation to come. It will become a nation, hopefully.
Exactly. Yes,
right?
yes.
On that there is clarity. And there are two interesting volumes, one published by G. Rosius, which says Nationalism Without a Nation, that is the title. Another published by Christoph Jaffer Law, Pakistan, Nationalism Without a Nation. So there are two volumes, both one for India and one for Pakistan. So it is very clear that this is still a nation to come. So we have to create a nation. So there are two guiding principles which I really, from what I could distill from Dr. Ambedkar, from whatever little I have read about him. One, that the nation to come will be a form of an associational democracy, right?
Yeah.
So there is great clarity on that. It is not only about liberty and equality, but it is about fraternity. At least people should be able to talk to each other, they should be able to marry each other, they should be able to love each other across religious boundaries, across caste boundaries, and so on and so forth. So that is the fundamental, the core principle which I see in Dr. Saab, right? This idea of an associational democracy, this idea of fraternity. So that is core principle. Then second, he also says, even when equality might be a fiction, right? But at least it should be a guiding idea, right?
Guiding principle.
It should be the guiding principle of all our politics, right? So once we are clear on what kind of nation we have to envisage, or what kind of nation we have to build, so the guiding principles are very clear. Second, affective change and structural change, which can be articulated in the earlier vocabulary. It was articulated in the sense of social and political, like we discussed earlier. So structural change has to go in a dialectical movement with affective change. So if there is structural change and people's emotions, people's sensibilities are not ready for it, it will collapse. Unless there is affective change, meaningful structural change is not possible. So it's a chicken and egg question. So the question of affect and question of structure.
I see it this way. I agree totally with you. I see this is the moment to discuss this. This moment has arrived, which means that it's not so far at utopia. It's a possibility. Beyond this, how can we form these sort of solidarities?
It will happen.
It is necessary because it is very necessary. It is not a question of just electoral alliances. As you said, you rightly pointed out, we have to build social institutions.
At least, I mean, we have to get a conversation going.
Yes.
The very reason that you have come all of the way from Hyderabad, and I have drove 7 hours from Saharanpur just to discuss this. That is a good beginning, isn't it? So this will keep on happening. It will be built inch by inch, brick by brick, slowly but surely. And the Bahujan will have to reclaim the universal. it, just like Dr. Ambedkar said, that even when equality is a fiction,
Yes.
it must be a guiding principle. Now the Bahujan must start seeing itself as the governing class
Yes.
in India.
Exactly. Yes.
And governing class not in order to get the benefits of a future regime, but a governing class which can really bring about the values of liberty, equality and fraternity into the body politic, into the nation, to the maximum level possible. And it will be an ongoing process. There could be no timelines. Freedom, equality, fraternity has to be fought each day. And now, but the Bahujan, it has to see itself as the universal class. And the class that will govern the destiny of India from now onwards.
Yes.
At least that confidence should be there. And we should not be pessimistic about it or underconfident about it.
Practical to hona hai.
We have to be practical. We have to talk about it. And that confidence should be there.
Yes.
And I see great hope. The young people across board in the campuses, everywhere, outside the campuses, they are discussing these issues. And that is a good sign. Once we start discussing, once an idea has found mention somewhere, it will become a reality sooner than later. And that is a good sign.
Yeah, of course. We without hope, as you said, we won't be meeting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So on that very positive note, I thank you for agreeing to talk with us, and thank you very much, and
Thank you
all
so
the
much,
best to
Kuffir.
you.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Jai Bhim, Jai Pasmanda.
Jai Bhim. Jai Bhim.